Well, today I'm here with Penelope Rupert, and Penelope is somebody who I met very early on at my time at KYC. In fact, I think I had an email from you sitting in my inbox prior to my first day, right? And I think that speaks a lot to you and like your eagerness and your willingness to make connections with community members. I mean, we'll talk more about that throughout this episode, but I'm just here today to talk to you about organizing and your community organizing work, an upcoming event that you're helping to plan, another one in your repertoire. And I just think there's a lot of folks out here who are going to really get to learn a lot from you. So Penny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, so I'm Penelope or Penny. I use she, her pronouns. I am I struggle with like calling myself a community organizer at this point. I feel like I'm someone who has done organizing and that tries to organize people towards political change and towards just a better world. But I'm also a student. I do queer studies. I'm a grad student.
So, okay, one thing I want to address is, how old are you?
I'm 21.
You're 21.
Yes.
So for those, like, Penny does a lot of things, and she's also very humble. So if I may, Penny has done a lot in 21 years. You are a grad student at age 21, right? And this is not even like your first semester in grad school. You have been in grad school for how long now?
This is my second year in grad school, yeah. And I'm in the Department of Comparative Studies at OSU. I'm trying to like look at discourses of age, race, and gender within soil science, which is it sounds like unrelated to like what like community organizing or like kaleidoscope, but honestly, like these things all together for me like feed together. Like they don't. It's really difficult for me to separate my school life and like also like it's my job. I'm starting teaching next week. From what I've learned here and what I've learned from you all as like staff and other like youth at the center. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I am so jealous of the students in that class that you're going to be teaching, because when was that even? There was a time not long ago, maybe 6 months ago or so, maybe it's been longer than that, that you presented at KYC during an advocacy meeting. And I was sitting there not really knowing where this conversation was going to go, just because, as you described, like it seemed like a very unrelated intersection of topics.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there listening, feeling like I am in the best college class of my life, right? I'm learning so much. I am just, gaining so much insight on how unrelated things really do have this, profound connection. And not only that was I sitting there, but other youth in the center, like, I mean, any teacher who's listening, any parent, any student themselves is like, it is hard to captivate teenagers' attention in class, whatever. But you had everyone just absolutely zeroed in on what you were saying. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that topic that you discussed?
Yeah, so that is a workshop that is called Queering Fire and Ash. And basically, like, the goal was to really look at the there's like several prongs of it. So I was thinking about I ended up like redoing it actually at the last academic conference I went to, which was Dimensions of Political Ecology. And so I was looking at like fire as like an affect. So like what does it mean to like feel fiery, and what does like queer fire feel like in someone? Like what does that like in like both in terms of like rage and like a more like libidinal feeling. And I was also thinking about like the like multi-species nature of like ash that comes about from like wildfires and like the burning of like land that is indigenous land and is queer as in relationship to like settler colonialism. And so this is, I'm trying to like loop in all of these various different through lines to try to get to like an overarching like queer theory of fire and ash that's like supported by like scholarship that has been done on that topic by people like Mel Chen, like Catherine Yusoff. So like it's not, I say all of these things and people like look at me like I'm crazy, which is sometimes fair. But I am like within a academic tradition. I'm within an organizing tradition, and so um, I'm
Yeah.
happy that you still think about that because
because there's a lot of times like I mean I have a bachelor's degree at this moment. I don't necessarily have intentions of going back to school. That's not to say that's not going to happen, right? But one of the intimidating factors for me of academia is like you set out to like for the first time, really, because all of your academic life up to that point, you're kind of taking in what other people have studied and regurgitating it to show that you've learned something. But at a certain point, you are expected to come up with your own original thought and come up with something that like hasn't been thought of before or researched before, and put something out into the world that is your own, right? And I'm always so daunted by that because I'm like, I don't even know what I don't know. How do I come up? And then you come up with something like that, and it's like, oh, well, sure, of course that makes sense as something to study and as something to talk about. So I was very just compelled by that.
Yeah, and I think like one of the big lessons that we can learn from like folks like bell hooks is like theory and like these things that we put into like the box of like philosophy or this is academia. This is actually something that anyone can do. It's theory is for everyone. Being able to like generate your own knowledge, you actually do that every day. Like this is not so like there's a certain language that is privileged by the academy, and I have like fallen into that because of like neurodivergence or whatnot. But ultimately, I like some of the most important lessons that I get from people are not inside of like seminars or whatever. It's just in conversations in the community, like with people at like the concerts or anything like that, and that's just kind of like I think ignored, and I think really the academy does a disservice when it like prioritizes itself as like the best or only form of knowledge over what it is that people know from their lived experience, from conversations with each other, because knowledge is not hierarchical truly. And people who try to like force it to be they're doing that to make money. You know?
Right. Doing it to make money. They're doing it to hold people back that they don't want to have that knowledge for whatever reason, right? I completely agree. I mean, I think that conversations are some of the most powerful educational tools that we have. I mean, we could spiral off into that for however long, right? But I think when I think back to my own college experience, the most that I learned came from, as you said, seminars aren't the only place, but I appreciated when we'd read and then have a discussion about that reading. I didn't learn from, reading textbooks and taking a quiz. I learned from that discussion of like whatever you just shared about your lived experience wasn't in that book, but that's your takeaway and your reflection from that. All of a sudden I have this whole new perspective, right? That's learning. Absolutely. And so I appreciate that you bring up like those types of conversations can happen at a concert. They can happen at the grocery store checkout line. You never know. Absolutely. And I think it's a testament to like kind of pulling your head up from your phone and actually engaging with others around you too. And the, like educational moments, the life perspectives you can get from that.
Yes. Yeah.
So this has been a little bit about you as an academic, but I want to touch more on your work as a community organizer. Now, you said you hesitate to call yourself that as a label, but I don't want to undersell the vast amount of organizing work that you have done in the community. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and experience with that?
Yeah. So I would describe my organizing is like very projectual, so like project based, and that has led to basically me taking on various different roles throughout the years. I started organizing in 2020 and probably around January. I started out quite terribly, volunteering for the Bernie Sanders campaign. And then basically that moved into like broader like student organizing, trying to get COVID relief for students because I was at Ohio State at the time and they were not giving students refunds. They weren't giving students refunds for housing. They weren't housing students that like for whatever reason couldn't go home because like the assumption is, oh, you're a college student, you can go home. We know that as like queer and trans folks, it's not that easy, that's not, and there was just, it was embarrassing. But since then I've worked on various campaigns, not electoral campaigns, but thinking about like campaigns to make changes from institutions. I've helped organize marches, events, panels, rallies, teach-ins, whatnot. Yeah.
And you've also like collected signatures for
Yeah, I did do
initiatives.
that. Yeah.
I think it's important to highlight all the different ways that one could be an organizer, right?
Yes.
And we can get into that too, but I want to talk about like, I got to attend one of the events that you organized, actually maybe two of them, because there was the youth drag show as well,
Yes.
which was epic. I mean,
Yeah.
I went into that thinking like, I don't even know what to expect, but it was kind of this like
Yeah.
rogue event that wasn't like an official. I mean, we don't have to talk about those logistics.
It
I
was
was like, really didn't know what was about to go down, and it was this fantastic drag show with all sorts of like young up and coming performers.
Yeah.
Who like this is their first time doing it. Like,
almost all first time performers. Yeah. And also just like across multiple different genres. I'm still extremely proud of that. And that
the turnout was fantastic
Yeah.
too. So it wasn't like, okay, it's just your buddies up on stage, whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, like people came to watch this. So that was really cool.
Yes. Yeah. So that was with COIL, Central Ohio Youth Liberation, which I know members of have been on the podcast before.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was definitely like one of my favorite events. I really enjoyed also earlier in that year the March for Queer and Trans Youth Autonomy.
Yeah. And that was the other event
Yeah.
of yours that I attended. Again, you hear a march. Marches happen all the time, right? Whether that's a group of people meeting on the corner outside of the State House to people who are actually taking to the streets and everything in between. And I went to that event and I was shocked by how many people were there. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was March 31st of 2023, right?
Trans Day Visibility,
Yep.
yes.
And it was, the weather was nice that day. I remember it being like very temperate for March.
Was a whole thing because we were also planning a free store to happen at the same time. I don't know if you remember this.
Yes.
Yeah. And we had to like cancel it because we thought it was going to rain and we thought no one was going to show up. But then the weather was perfect and amazing. And we just did the free market, which is basically like, it's a very much like a mode that's like of like, give what you can, take what you need, where everyone just is like, it's like a free thrift store.
Yeah.
And that happened the following week.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, the march was epic. I mean, it was attended by folks of all different ages. You all were very intentional about like not engaging with law enforcement, right? And you had everyone really on that same page. You had everybody, I was one of the folks who stood in front of the group, and it was kind of a funny moment. I think it was you, somebody must have said like, we need cis adult allies to stand in the front. You had these big letters to kind of like help block in the event that there was some sort of conflict. And I'm standing there like, oh yeah, an adult will take care of that. And then I went, I'm an adult. Yeah, I'll do that. I had
Yeah,
that disconnect where I was like, I am in fact a grown up.
yeah, yeah.
So that was really incredible. I mean, just all of those details thought out. And you also had, like, for safety measures, you had community folks who were on bikes, who had the first aid supplies with them, ready to take care of the community. It was pretty epic. So that was, I mean, your community organizing is thoughtful, it's intentional. It's, in many cases, while you're advocating for queer and trans youth, you also are cross-generational as well. I mean, there's a lot of intent behind everything that you do.
Yeah.
And what I like about it is there's always this focus on art and creativity. The drag show is an obvious example, but before this rally started, there was poetry, there was spoken word, there was, like, songs. Talk more about that.
Yeah. I think that artistic element, I think one of the big, I think that, like, killjoy feminism is important, but I think that, like, when you're too far into like a kind of like killjoy mindset, it ends up losing that sort of, like, actual queer and trans joy that, like, is foundational to like survivance. You can't survive without that joy. And so really it was trying to, like, be like this event, all of the events are predicated around, like, trying to make it that way. We're not just doing this, like, and it makes it feel like a 9 to 5, like we're marching and all we are is angry. Like, I think I wanted to really make a point. It's like, hold your anger, yes, but also, like, hold your passion, hold your desire for a better world. We also had, like, a poster making session, I think, at the center before that. We had, before the drag show, we had like a 101 how to do drag makeup downstairs. And so it was, it was really trying to, like, get to, and I think it still, like, informs a lot of my organizing. I think I did a similar format for this year, where this spring my big event was, like, on June 1st, I had a march against pinkwashing, which is like a strategy to make aspects of colonialism and capitalism appear to be LGBT friendly. And now at the end of the summer, I'm hosting a benefit show that I've co-planned with various people that's trying to raise money for refugees. And so that's kind of like, I want that moment of, like, being able to hold those various emotions in both, like, a march format, something where you're taking the street, and also something that's, like, really building community through art. Because, like, I know so many people, like, who met each other or made connections that they further used through both the march and the drag show. So, like, for instance, there was a band that performed at the drag show that it was their first gig. It was Made by Vampires, and they ended up finding the venue for their second gig from someone that was attending the drag show. And so this was like, these are the kinds of things that, like, now they've played various more gigs since then, and that's kind of like, and it was all like, that band is, like, all queer teens. Like, I think the oldest person's, like, now 19. They were, like, 18 or 17 at the time. Yeah. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah.
That's and it's so powerful to think of all these community connections that you've made, because now that person has that connection, who are they going to extend that to moving forward?
Yeah.
And creating that network, and even incorporating elements of joy too, that is resistance, right?
Absolutely.
Because, like, the dividing of people, the division of people, and the extraction of joy from these things, that's what wears people down, right? But when you're in community and you're creating together and you're finding joy in what you're doing, it's helping to replenish your energy to keep pushing against some of the things you are trying to resist, right?
Yeah, and that's why I used to do a lot of work with testimony, and I think I still admire people that do a lot of that work, but I stopped because I felt like, for me, my motivation to go and do that was very like fear-based. It was like I was doing it just purely out of like irrational, I think, fear of what the Ohio legislation, what all of these state and local institutions are going to like do to trans youth and trans women specifically. And I can value that, and I think I learned so much from being in those spaces. But I just like I think that like we need to hold space for that, as well as modes of organizing, of building community, of building alternative structures that hold like that like multiplicity of emotions. And I'm not saying it's impossible to do that when when doing testimony. I've seen it be done, it was hard for me specifically as an individual, though.
Oh,
yeah.
totally. I mean, because you go in these spaces and you're pouring your heart out in front of these people who are like sitting there because they sort of have to, but like they're still going to do whatever they want anyway.
Yeah.
And it's really disheartening to say that, especially as somebody who, like, the work that I do is trying to get people to speak out and whatever, right? But I also do that with a caveat of like, unfortunately, we live under a gerrymandered legislature. Like, they can do whatever they want, right? So finding those multiple outlets for organizing and for creating change and for building community, it just pushes back against everything that they can do legislatively. We can still have these forms of resistance. We still have community. They can't take that away, right? And I think the work you are doing, those multiple layers, it shows that like there's no one way to create change, that you don't have to do it through these existing formal structures, right? You can create your own world, this vision of what is possible.
Yes.
So one of these other ways that you've spoken about the march and rally that you organized last year, but there is an event coming up this year as well that I would love for you to speak to, because I think there's a lot of folks who either would want to attend or they may want to help organize themselves.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the second annual March and Speakout for Trans Lives is happening in Columbus, Ohio this year, and this is the only location that is happening. So there's also, the march that we were speaking about, the March for Queer Youth Autonomy, was part of like a national series of events. This is trying to get folks coast to coast to come to Columbus, Ohio. Basically, and the strategy is, again, the second annual one. The first one was in Florida last year, following
everything in Florida.
Yeah. And now they're going to, a different red state, and I feel bad that we're just like a red state now, but we are trying to get national eyes and spotlight on the issues that are serious in this state, regarding all facets of trans life and livingness. So thinking about both legislation as well as continued attacks, especially on like Black trans women in our communities, and and so I'm part of the local committee to plan this, and there's also a national committee, which is primarily, I would, bi-coastal. I don't know, like, the bi-coastal, it's like such a bougie word, but whatever. Right. Yeah. Anyway, so the local committee is trying to put on a series of events and really get the word out in Columbus, Ohio, about this. Which is where I imagine most of your listeners are. Right. And so truly, it's kind of, the goal is not just for us to get these like national folks to like come in and like speak on our behalf. It's the speak out section of the March and Speak Out for Trans Lives is there will be like an open mic portion,
Oh, wow.
similar to how there was at the March for Queer and Trans Youth Autonomy,
Right.
to try to get it so that way people who have something to say, who are like deeply passionate, I'm assuming primarily local folks, will get like that sort of national spotlight and will be able to speak to trans organizers from across the country about like what are our issues here, and like how are we thinking about the ways that transphobia and its intersections with misogyny, racism, colonialism, etc., are deeply impacting our lives.
So when is this March and Speak Out happening?
Yes, so it is October 19th, and the question was when. Yeah, so we are working on formalizing like what time of the day and location right now, and I'm just not at a point where I can speak publicly about that. But by the time this comes out, it will likely be
and
more likely be very public, like where we are meeting, what time we're meeting, and there will be a similar, again, we're going to take the streets, we're going to be acting in a very similar method of community safety that you described, so having street medics, having a strong stance of not speaking to law enforcement and not working with law enforcement, just for a variety of reasons, but primarily understanding the intersecting violences that occur against trans people of color at the hands of our local police departments.
Yeah.
And
so folks should just block off October 19th, right?
Yes.
And I imagine that it's not just going to be like an hour-long thing. Like this is a day-long event, more or less. So I imagine it's, even if you can't make it to one portion, you can hop in the march, or you can just come for the Speak Out and not for the march or whatever, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping that it should, and especially like even if you're not like for whatever reason able to come on the 19th, there are going to be a variety of events that are happening coming up to it. So in the future from now, but in the past from when this will come out, we're having a panel on pinkwashing that's going to be featuring folks that are talking about pinkwashing in regards to Israel-Palestine, as well as pinkwashing and settler homo-nationalism in context of settler colonialism in North America, which is like overlooked. People don't think about like, what does it mean for like the United States and Canadian state to claim like queer friendliness while still banning certain like queer indigenous practices, or just indigenous survivance where we still have a like missing and murdered indigenous women in Two-Spirit crisis across the country. And sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, I appreciate that there's so many events, so if somebody can't make it to October 19th, where can people find out more information about these events, or like look for an update about the time when that becomes available?
Yeah. So we have an Instagram, which is at Trans Youth March. And there also is a Facebook page that I don't know. I help with the Instagram. I don't help with the Facebook. It's a multi-generational effort.
Exactly.
It's helpful. Yeah, and then there is also our website, which is protecttranskidsmarch.org. And yeah, it's quite. I mean, yeah. And so that will have information about the march. And that also will have the list of demands and the list of organizations across the country which have endorsed those demands, which right now is a very large list, actually.
Oh, wow.
And includes some fairly major institutions. And so there's like a couple different modes of organizing happening right now. I think for myself and people in the local committee, it's really like we're trying to like get the word out among people in Columbus, especially in like kind of like the like punk scene and like the live music scene in like neighborhoods like Sohud in the Old North. And by flyering and by doing events like this and the panel, and we're going to be having a benefit show with some local bands and as well as film screenings. But there are people at the national level which are really doing work to reach out to various different organizations to try to get folks to donate or to like send representatives to the march so that way they can treat it like as a way for trans organizers and allied organizers across the country to like, you know, network, which is always like sounds boring, but it's like the most important thing is just like building those connections, as you said earlier, as we talked about earlier. And there's been a real effort to reach out to labor unions, which I think is very important. And yeah, it's been there's a lot of things happening, and I think necessarily I don't know everything that is happening, and that's actually like how you know it's a coalition effort. And I've been recently like really inspired by ACT UP and like really reading up on the history of ACT UP New York. And like one of the big things there is like you're all working towards the same goal and you have very different like strategies to get there. But that doesn't mean that like people aren't contradicting each other, because we know the importance of having national attention on trans life in Ohio right now, because
Yeah,
it's rough out here, you know, like yeah. And
if people are wanting to get involved and support the effort in some way or be part of this coalition, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, so there is a form to get involved, which I will send to you, and you can put it into the group description. If you are interested in getting involved specifically on the local committee and are interested in what I've spoken about for the local committee, you can also DM the Instagram page. And that would be, for me, significantly more direct. But I think that's also like, even if you don't have capacity to necessarily like go to like committee meetings, because we're meeting like once every other week, getting that word out inside of your communities. You know, we have flyers that you can print out. These are things that like are important. So even if it's something where you're only able to attend on the 19th, or you're not even able to attend on the 19th, but you're able to talk about it, that's still helpful. Because like every time someone like mentions like the need for a national march and speak out for trans lives, that's drawing attention to the fact that like trans liberation has not been achieved. There is not. Yeah, and so that is there's multiple different avenues to get involved. It's not just like I'm not going to force everyone to be like, join the committee. It's, you know, committees aren't for everyone. Committees,
Right.
sometimes those meetings are rough.
And for good
I love it.
reason. Like if you have a whole bunch of people on a committee, it's no longer really a committee at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Our committee meetings are rough. But the committee meetings in general can be rough. Yeah. And so basically, yeah, and I think,
well, the concept of getting involved sounds daunting because it's like, dang, I don't want to organize this whole thing. But as you said, getting involved could just be saying, I'm going to hang up a flyer at my coffee shop that I'm going to this weekend anyway.
Absolutely.
I'm going to talk to my friends about it because we were actually looking to get together on the 19th anyway. So why don't we just hang out here instead? You know what I mean? Like, there's lots of different ways to get involved that doesn't necessarily mean like, I'm going to be the street medic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be, right?
It could, yes.
I'm going to point out we're at 1:00, so I don't want to hold you over for your next thing. So we can wrap things up if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I do have like one final point I want to make. Yeah.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the big things is like the various different ways to get involved really show that like anyone can be an organizer, and how you organize can look various different ways. You know, anyone can organize events, anyone can organize towards liberation. And so, you know, there's this, I've met, again, the people that started this coalition with the march in Florida, and they kind of just had this big idea, and then they made it real. And now there's all of these different moving parts happening. And that's like, all it really takes is like some people who have a strong idea and who have the passion and willingness and drive to make it happen. And so, you know, people get worried about like, do I have the skills? Do I have like, the know-how? And like, that's all details. What really matters is like, doing something and then doing it again, and that consistency. And that's why we're hoping to like at least like double or triple the size of the march from last year this time. And that consistency is key. That willingness to not give up is what makes it so that way. Like, I've made so many mistakes while organizing, but I keep working, and that I think is the most important thing to do as an organizer and as anyone in a committee who's trying to work towards change. So thank you. Yeah.
I could not think of a better way to sum it up than that. Penelope, thank you so much for being here. As a reminder, the event is happening on Saturday, October 19th in Columbus. Exact location and time to be determined, but you can follow Trans Youth March on Instagram. Rumor has it there's a Facebook page too. And if you're interested in getting involved and learning more, check out that. The website is linked on the Instagram page. Send it a DM if you have questions or want to get involved. Yes. There is a place for you in the movement. There's a place for you in this specific event, it sounds like. So I can't thank you enough for being here and just sharing your infinite wisdom.
Thank you, Mal, and you always know how to compliment me. And I appreciate that.
Always well deserved. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope to see all of you listeners in person at this event on October 19th.